From the four corners of the earth and the far corridors of history. Dateline, World War II. December 1942, Guadalcanal. General Alexander Patch's 14th Corps relieves General Vandegrift's 1st Marine Division. The men of the 1st, who have been here far longer than was ever intended, are exhausted. Left holding the bag when the Navy pulled out, the Marines, short on supplies, had to fight not only the Japanese, but malaria, dysentery, and numerous other maladies. Although they are exhausted, the men eagerly climb the cargo nets to board the ships that will carry them to a well-deserved rest in Australia. The 14th Corps, made up of the Army's 23rd and 25th Divisions and elements of the 2nd Marine Division, goes about settling in on the island. Except for small skirmishes, there is a general lull in the fighting as the fresh troops take up their positions. The Japanese continue to attempt resupply of their forces, but with little success, as American planes send tons of shipping to the bottom. The Japanese resort to dumping crates of supplies overboard in hopes they will wash ashore. Few ever reach the island. Although both sides have about 20,000 men on Guadalcanal, the Japanese are not nearly as well equipped or well fed as the fresh troops of the 14th Corps. Patch and his commanders plan to take advantage of this and design a massive offensive to drive the Japanese off the island for good. On 17 December, the attack begins against the Japanese stronghold of Mount Austin. Rising some 1,500 feet southwest of Henderson Field, Austin is covered with fortified Japanese positions. The Americans find the going rough from the beginning. Machine guns hidden deep in pillboxes and obscured by the jungle shower the advancing GIs with hot lead. The men of the 2nd Battalion, 132nd Regimental Combat Team, who were not so long ago weekend warriors from Illinois, take the brunt of the battle. It quickly turns into a bloody stalemate. On 20 December, the commander of the 2nd Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel William Wright, is killed. His men, hot for revenge, press forward with renewed vigor and by Christmas Eve have reached the machine gun-protected perimeter of the Japanese defenses. Alarmed at the casualty rate sustained by the infantry units driving into the teeth of the Japanese defenses, Patch orders them to fight a holding action, while bombers and artillery soften up the enemy's fortifications. The 14th Corps' big guns pound the Japanese, who seek shelter in their hardened bunkers. In Japan, the High Command realizes with the American Navy strangling their supply routes to the island and their forces under heavy attack, that all hope for holding Guadalcanal is lost. On 31 December, they issue an order for the garrison to withdraw to other islands in the Solomon Chain. All of this is unknown to General Patch and his men. They cannot conceive of the Japanese giving up the island. Based on the fanatical determination of the troops defending Mount Austin, the Americans are convinced that the Japanese will, to a man, fight to the death. In fact, they have given the Americans no reason to believe otherwise. Although they know the battle is lost, the defenders on Austin continue to fight as viciously as before. Casualties mount as the Americans drive the Japanese from their positions, one by one. Despite the fact that his troops are making progress, Patch believes they are still in for a long, tough fight. Although the Japanese troops are hungry and short of supplies, they are exacting a heavy toll for every inch of ground. He fears that driving them from the island will take months, claiming thousands of American lives. What he does not know is that he may be, instead, very close to claiming the first American land victory in the Pacific. December 1942, in Algiers, the air is thick with intrigue as the French High Commissioner of North Africa, Admiral Darlan, is shot dead in his outer office. After 2 years of fruitful dalliance in the Nazi camp, Darla had only recently begun collaborating with the Allies. He was, in many ways, a man without a country, and his murder takes no one by surprise. Still, questions abound, and rumors of Byzantine plots fill the African night. The answers lie with the killer, a graduate of an American-sponsored intelligence school and a self-described French patriot. French patriotism is, these days, difficult to define. France is an occupied nation. The remains of the French Empire are administered by the Vichy regime of Marshal Henri Pétain. It is a government of civil administrators and figureheads who operate in the shadow of their Nazi occupiers, but a government that nonetheless believes it can chart the best route to French independence. Darlan began the war as a sworn supporter of Pétain, which made him a sworn enemy of the Free French, who dismissed Pétain and his consort as enemy collaborators. But by the time Operation Torch brought the first Americans to North Africa, Darlan seemed a likely candidate for conversion to the Allied cause. So, in secret meetings prior to the invasion, he signed on with the Allies, surrendering Vichy's forces in North Africa and making possible the rapid movement of the U.S. troops through French territory and up to the German lines. Though Darlan almost certainly thought himself acting in the best interests of France, he suffered the fate of most turncoats. He was ostracized not just by his former allies, but by his new Confederates as well. The Nazis loathed him for his sudden shift, and the Allies distrusted him because there is always the danger that a man who changes sides once will change sides again. When Darlan is assassinated, French General Henri Giraud, installed by Eisenhower to keep an eye on Darlan, assumes leadership of the French North African forces without missing so much as an hors d'oeuvre. Not surprisingly, rumors abound. The idea that Darlan was killed by a lone assassin is difficult for anyone to accept. Simply stated, too many people wanted him dead. What quickly becomes clear is that the French government in North Africa has little interest in pursuing all the possibilities. Darlan is shot on Christmas Eve, and the unseen and almost anonymous assassin is tried and found guilty the next morning. Before the sun rises on the 26th, he is dead, executed by firing squad. What remains of l'affaire Darlan is sure to be one of the enduring mysteries of this war, a whodunit with the last pages torn roughly away. For now, all that is certain is that in French North Africa, the line between the sides is a bit more clearly drawn than it was only a few days ago. In the future, anyone considering crossing over will be wise to think twice. 3 January 1943, Saint-Nazaire. Bomber squadrons of the 8th Army Air Force approached the west coast of France in an attempt to destroy the German sub-pens located there. This second Allied air raid on Saint-Nazaire is the latest step in the young science of anti-submarine warfare. Pilots and commanders have constantly devised and tested new tactics in their efforts to protect Allied shipping from Hitler's murderously effective submarine wolf packs. Although the bomber groups of the 8th were initially assigned to Britain to assist in the war against the Luftwaffe in January 1942, Churchill's new anti-U-boat warfare committee decided by August they would also be used to combat Hitler's submarines. Both the U.S. and Britain agree the most certain means of destroying a submarine is to catch it at the surface and engage it directly. The German submariners know that safety lies in stealth and have been extremely successful in concealing themselves. With monthly U-boat kills peaking in the low 20s, the Anti-U-Boat Committee has decided that rather than hunting individual members of the wolf packs, the fight should be taken to their dens. With its excellent access to the ocean, the Germans have lined the French coast with submarine pens. Protected by 26 feet of steel-reinforced concrete, as well as batteries of anti-aircraft guns, they were built in anticipation of the arrival of Allied bombers. They have proven quite impregnable. Even 1,000-pound bombs bounce harmlessly off the huge docks. More precise low-level attack is prevented by the anti-aircraft guns, which put up such a thick wall of shells that British pilots have nicknamed Sanzar Flak City. The submarines kept here are quite safe, as they are repaired and readied for their next stealthy missions in the waters of the English Channel. Between November and January, the Allied commanders designed a new technique for coordinating high-altitude bombing. Called bombing on leader, the technique involves an extremely tight formation of B-17s releasing their bombs on command of the lead fortress. This tactic, it is hoped, will yield tighter bomb patterns and break the wolf pen's defenses. These tight formations, however, make prime targets for the German gunners, who have started aiming not at the planes, but in front of them. The planes of the 8th simply fly into the explosions, sustaining massive damage. By the end of the first bomb-on-leader mission, 7 fortresses are down and over half the remaining bombers damaged. Whether the mission has actually destroyed any German subs remains to be seen. Allied commanders consider the day's experiment a success. Despite the loss of men and material, there is hope that the new technique will be effective and that Allied Atlantic pipelines will remain unbroken in the future. January 1943, Casablanca. U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, along with the top military of both their countries, arrive at the Anfa Hotel in this recently liberated Moroccan city to begin a series of high-level meetings. Also joining the group is General Henri Giraud, Supreme French Commander in North Africa. Conspicuous in his absence, however, is Russian dictator Joseph Stalin, who has declined attendance due to the critical situation at Stalingrad. While the purpose of the conference is to discuss and coordinate both short and long-term plans for the Allied war effort, within a few days it becomes apparent that the British have come not so much to discuss the war effort as to dictate to the Allies what each country's role is to be. The Americans, however, have several problems with the propositions made by the high-handed British, and behind the scenes, heated arguments ensue. The disagreements between the Americans and British lie in a fundamental difference of opinion on how to plot strategy. The English delegation seems intent on charting a far-reaching plan and sticking to it, no matter what eventualities arise, while the U.S. commanders would rather have freedom to adapt to situations as they present themselves. Also, American Admiral Ernest J. King's insistence that at least 30% of the Allied war effort be directed against Japan galls the British commanders. They cannot comprehend that the U.S. will not strictly adhere to the English plan of eliminating Mussolini and Hitler first before dealing with Japan. Meanwhile, news of the meeting is just now reaching Berlin. In December, as the conference was being planned, security in London and Washington, D.C. became increasingly tight. And while the operatives of the German Abwehr, a worldwide network of Nazi spies, could tell from increased activity in both cities that something was happening, Allied intelligence succeeded in concealing its exact nature and whereabouts. However, on 19 January, Walter Schellenberg, head of the Reich Central Security Office, relays information about the conference to Hitler. Ironically, Schellenberg believes that the meeting is in Washington, D.C. because the Spanish Casablanca translates as White House. In Morocco, the meetings continue. Then, on 22 January, just as plans are beginning to firm up and English-American relations are beginning to settle down, French General Charles de Gaulle arrives. De Gaulle, who refers to himself as France, feels slighted by FDR and Churchill, who failed to invite him to their conference. Pompous and indignant, he succeeds in disrupting the proceedings and insulting everyone, particularly his countryman Giraud. 10 tension-filled days after their arrival in Casablanca, the Allied leaders depart, having reached an agreement on the future conduct of the war. The plan, while quite similar to the one originally brought to the table by the British, is centered more on preparation and cooperation than on a specific timetable. Everyone involved knows that time will reveal the weaknesses of the Axis, and that only by working in concert can they discover and exploit those weaknesses. Clearly, despite all their differences, the men at Casablanca are in agreement on one fundamental point. The only acceptable end to this war is the unconditional surrender of both Germany and Japan. The ubiquitous presence of automobiles on the battlefield is unique to this Second World War. The increase in mobility and speed the auto brought to the civilian world has been a boon to the military as well, providing rapid transport of men and materials alike. But the vehicles have paid a high price for their services. One need only glance around a newly deserted battlefield to see dozens of charred jeeps and trucks, their tires wilted and windshields shattered. This war has required no small sacrifice from the people on the home front. But of all the materials which people must do without, none creates more consternation than rubber. The Japanese invasion of the Asian subcontinent effectively clamped off the source of most of America's rubber. People across the country rushed out to stockpile tires for their own use. This hoarding came to an abrupt end with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
Specifically, we don't know how much used rubber there is in your cellar, your barn, your stockroom, your garage, your attic. The only way to find out is to get the used rubber in where it can stand up and be counted.
The scarcity of rubber has been dealt with on every front. President Roosevelt has appealed in his radio broadcast to the people of the country, asking them to find their spent rubber items from old galoshes and water bottles to worn-out tires and bring them to recycling facilities. There, the rubber is reclaimed and put to use in the war effort. Through special processes which separate good, salvageable material from foreign substances, such as fibers in tire walls, the revitalized rubber can then be fabricated into the tires, belts, and hoses that keep automobiles running. Even as methods have been developed for reclaiming spent rubber, others have been developed for making a new kind of rubber. Scientists have succeeded in formulating a synthetic rubber called government rubber styrene, which is similar to, but superior to, the German Buna rubber. Factories across the country are now dedicated to the manufacture of GRS. The effort to provide automobiles for the battlefront extends into all realms on the home front. Entire cars are recycled, their metal slagged and reformed into new vehicles. People throughout the nation have taken to carpooling to work in order to save gasoline, proudly displaying on their windshields stickers which indicate how much gas they are permitted to buy each week. No one is allowed to drive for pleasure, except members of Congress. The strict rationing of all things car-related seems counter to the great mobility and expansiveness upon which the country is based. But it must be remembered that the beneficiaries of rationing are the nation's boys fighting on foreign soil.
Of one thing you can be sure. We are going to see to it that there's enough rubber to build the planes to bomb Tokyo and Berlin. Enough rubber to build the tanks to crush the enemy wherever we may find him. Enough rubber to win this war.